and welcome to the last video of February. It is what I read in February, my February wrap up. Guys, I read 15 books in February, and that is like a lot anyway. For a short month, that's extra lot. Well done me. I did DNA 3 books. I'm trying to keep more of a record of, well, you'll see from my wrap up, I'm trying to keep more of a record of books that I'm DNFing, books that I'm hauling, and sort of like an idea of like the numbers around there. So we'll start with the stats and the DNFs, if that's okay with you. So I've read 15 books. 7 of those I owned, which is great news because it means I'm reading books off my shelves and books that I'm hauling, which is 47% of my reading for the month. 5 of those were audiobooks, so that's 33% of my reading for the month. And 3 of those were library books, which is 20% of my reading for the month. So pleased with all of those stats, really pleased to still be using the library, pleased to be reading books off my shelves, always enjoying audiobooks. So overall, if we're looking at the stats for this year so far, I've read 23 books in total this year. And 11 of those have been books that I've owned, which is 48% of my reading. 7 of those have been audiobooks, which is 30% of my reading. 4 of those have been library books, which is 17% of my reading. And 1 I borrowed from my sister, which is 4% of my reading. So yeah, pretty pleased with how that's going. If we're having a look at how much I'm actually reading from my TBR, so you'll note that I'll do you'll notice that I do a TBR on the 1st of every month, and that's something I've done basically since the channel started. And I was just interested how many books I was actually reading from that TBR, so like collected sort of like 15 books that I plan to read that month, how many of those I was actually reading. So I read 11 books off of my 19 book TBR this month. Now that does include 2 books that were on my TBR that I then DNF'd because I'm not going to read those, so that does include that. And I also read 2 books from my January TBR, which means that I read, in total I've read 58% of my TBR for this month, and in total my TBRs that I've set this year I've read 46%. Let me know if this is even interesting to you, but I was quite enjoying doing the sums. And then the hauls, so this month I hauled 45 books. No, sorry, I've hauled 45 books so far this year, of which I've read 4. Which is 9%. And I've hauled 48 library books and read 8 of them. 3 of that, well I said read, but 5 read, 3 DNF, so that's 17%, so that's a slightly bit better. But obviously none of these numbers are going to be like 100%, but well, maybe I might have read more than 9% of the books that I've hauled this year. Anyway, on to the actual books and the reviews. Like I said, there's 15 of them. Oh, sorry, I said I'd start with the DNF. So, I won't have loads of details about this, but basically 2 books I read, which I tried reading like the first chapter of both during a Friday reading vlog, and I didn't get on with either of those. One was Crossing the Mangrove and the other was Tale of the Bluebird. I didn't like the writing style, and maybe they just weren't for me at that time, so I gelled both of those on. And then I also didn't read The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I was listening to the audiobook that I got quite far in actually, and then decided not to continue with that. Oh, excuse me, one of my poppers has come undone, and decided not to carry on with that. I think, more on that later, is that was a dark academia book, and I just read and really loved a dark academia book, and I kept thinking about how much it wasn't as good as the book that I'd read before, but more on that later. So let's talk about the books I did read. So I started the month with How Not to Be Strong by Alex Scott. This was a Christmas present from David. Alex Scott is a TV presenter, sports presenter, played for the Lionesses, the GB's, England's football team, women's football team. She was also on Strictly Come Dancing, so big sort of media presence. And I really enjoyed this sort of a memoir of hers, talking about her experience of playing football and all the sort of things that she had to really push to get done, and all of the successes that she's had in women's football. She's ever so modest and ever so sort of like, oh, but also very acknowledging of her successes, and I really appreciate that in a person, and particularly in a woman of colour as well. And yeah, I really enjoyed this and like found out lots more. I'm not a big sort of like, I don't have much knowledge about football and stuff like that, but I felt like this was the perfect level of it for me. And it was also interesting to hear about her background and her relationship with her father, which wasn't ever a good one, and her sort of deciding to cut ties with him, and a relationship that she had with a fellow footballer who was an alcoholic and that. So there's a lot, like Alex has lived, and I enjoyed hearing all about that. Obviously I love the Strictly Come Dancing parts as well, because I did. Her Paso Doble routine to Who Run the World by Girls by Beyonce. It's one of my favourite routines ever. It was done at Blackpool. It's just so strong. So yeah, really enjoyed this, and we'll be passing it on to my colleague who supports Arsenal and whose daughter plays for Chelsea under 12s maybe. So yeah, she'll be loving that. So there we go, that's the first book I read. Then onto another sort of memoir, and that was Spare by Prince Harry. Feel nervous about talking about this. I'll tell you, I mentioned this in a reading vlog as well, but when I said on Instagram that I was reading this, I got so many people messaging me saying they were really disappointed in me for reading this book, which just like blows my mind, because like I'm here making free content for you guys, and if people are cross with me for reading a particular book, you don't have to tell me that. I don't mind. Anyway, turns out I actually quite enjoyed this and was very sort of enlightened by it, and was surprised at how open he was. Like I knew there'd be revelations, but this was real big revelations. And I respected him for the amount of detail he shared, particularly because a lot of it would have been very hard to relive, not only through writing it, like the death of his mother, for instance, at the hands of the paparazzi, but also like difficult situations with his brother and his father and his grandmother and his wife wanting to kill herself because she just hated her life so much, and like having to sort of revisit that in thoughts, and then having to write that on the page, and then having to revisit it by reading it aloud for the audiobook. Like there's been, he would have had to face up to a lot of stuff which he like would have buried down deep, like particularly like the death of his mother. And I was really like I said, surprised at how much was shared here, and I cannot believe that the UK press is not held more accountable for the damage that they have done over the years. Like the Daily Mail, the Sun, like all of these awful newspapers that would just like push and push and push until literally the last thing that happens is that somebody dies. Prince Harry, so that also sort of like was reflected in so the things that happened to his mother were also reflected in like a TV presenter of recent times who died a couple of years ago, 2020 I think she died, Caroline Flack, which Prince Harry actually had a relationship with. I didn't know anything about that, but he had a relationship with her, and then him having to find out that she had died because she had killed herself because she was just so unhappy with the way that the press just wouldn't leave her alone. And yeah, it was very interesting and very honest, and I sort of applaud him for that. I do. And yeah, the writing was a bit mad. It was written in, so I listened to it, and the audio book, like none of the chapters were literally over like 7 minutes, so I don't know how it looks in print, but it felt very sort of like sporadic, and here was like a little bit about this and here's another little bit about that. And I never really sort of like settled into it. But then when I mentioned that, I think on a reading vlog, somebody said to me it's because Harry is has sort of like difficulties with concentration and stuff like that, so that's how he would take that sort of stuff in. So that was reflected in that. So fair enough if that's it wasn't like the best reading experience for me, and like it's written by himself and a ghostwriter, so there would have been like a bit of differences I guess there with that. But yeah, I enjoyed it and was really surprised at how sort of open and honest he was. And yeah, particularly with the stuff like that's going on now really with his like brother and his dad. Like I was really surprised, and I can't believe how much sort of like, I mean, I guess to get the full picture you'll have to read it. If you haven't read it and you've got something nasty to say, just don't bother. I just don't bother. But yeah, so like there's a lot of like his dad and Camilla like leaking stories about either Harry or William to sort of give them a bit of good press and stuff. It's just insane how it works. And yeah, I enjoyed it. The next one, did not enjoy. It was another audiobook. So it was The Book That No One Wanted to Read by Richard Ayoade. I thought this was going to be bloody brilliant. I love Richard Ayoade. I find him really funny. This is a children's book, and I listened to the audio of it. It was so dull. I mean, the title, The Book That No One Wanted to Read, I would definitely say that this is the book that I wanted to read. It's about a book that is trying to stay out of the way in order to save himself from being pulped, and it was just dull. It was just so like not gripping at all. There was like a half-assed go at potentially maybe a bit of interactivity and maybe a little bit of like sentimentality towards the end, but yeah, I found it completely boring. I wonder, I would like to maybe have a look. I will not be buying it, but maybe have a look at what this looks like in print and if maybe the illustrations carried it, because oh god, it was not good. Next up, 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is the second book this year that I've read and really enjoyed, that's been recommended by Reese Witherspoon, Reese's Book Club, and it's the second romance book from Reese Witherspoon's book club that I've really enjoyed. So this is set, as the title would suggest, in 7 days in June. I really liked the way this was told as well. So it's told 7 days in June from the perspective of Eva and Shane, and these two people have had a very sort of like fraught love story when they were in high school, and now we're reliving, and that happened in June, and that was like over a steamy summer, like maybe like 15 years ago, I don't know how, 15 years ago, and then we're hearing about them both in June 15 years from now. Now these are both authors, Eva and Shane are both authors, and the book itself really celebrates black authors, and in particular I really like the sort of like nod they did to other black authors, and like the names they were mentioning, and they were at like events and stuff like that celebrating this book, and I really liked that a lot, and yeah, the romance itself was really great. I had a really good time with this. I really enjoyed it. I think it would be a great summer read, particularly like the June steamy setting, but yeah, the chemistry was, I enjoyed it. I really liked it a lot, so I will be looking into more of Tia Williams' stuff, so enjoyed that a lot. Next book is a 5-star, and I mean, I would be surprised if this was usurped, if there's going to be things that are topping it. I've been at a really good reading year so far. Like things like this was like 4 stars. That was unheard of for me to read like a sort of women's contemporary fiction or romance book before and have such a good time with it. But yeah, I've been really enjoying it, and this next book was 5 stars, and that's Babel by R.F. Kuang, and that is a dark academia book, and it is the sort of first dark academia book that I've read knowing that it is a dark academia book. I've read oh goodness me, what's that one, oh my god, Donna Tartt, The Secret History. That's dark academia, but I read that sort of not knowing, but that dark academia is having a real sort of moment at the moment, and I read this and absolutely loved it. It's set in Oxford and really reminded me of like His Dark Materials, and particularly the first book in the His Dark Materials book where Lyra's in Oxford. So it's set in Oxford. I loved all the, I'll get onto the actual plot soon, but the actual book itself and the academia vibe. So like they had the sort of like learning of Oxford University, and that was, the book starts with this beautiful map of this Babel Tower where they all work, and it's just amazing. And then I also really liked, there were so many footnotes in the book which really felt sort of like added to the academic vibe of it. So there's a lot in here to do with colonialisation and stuff like that, and there was a lot of like references to what that would have like, something that's happened, and then that is being explained in a footnote. There's a lot of, so the main character we're following is Chinese, and there's a lot of sort of like references to the Chinese alphabet and the Chinese language, and like they will mention what a word is in Chinese, and then they'll give you the definition down below, or vice versa. They'll mention a word and then they'll tell you the Chinese definition down below, and I really loved all that. I really felt like really swept up in this sort of like academic vibe, and then the subject matter and the plot itself and how many like things it covered, I just thought it was amazing. I was a fucking wreck by the end as well. I absolutely cried my eyes out at the end. So forgive me, because the magic system is quite complex and I'm not very good at explaining magic systems, but basically in Babel we are following a young lad who has been, somebody has gone over, an academic guy has gone over to China, collected him from his family home where everybody has died because of a flu, and taken him home and sort of kept him as a ward, and then eventually he will go to this college within the Oxford University called Babel, which is to do with languages and silver work. And the magic system here revolves around bars of silver being engraved with word pairs from different languages in order to make something run better. So if I'm thinking of a really I can't think of the word that they use, but like, so for example, they'll be in a carriage, a horse and carriage, and the horse and carriage will be lined with silver bars, and they have got a word whispered to them, which means that a word engraved on them, which will mean that the carriage runs very gently and doesn't bang around as it would. And there's things like that inserted in like railways. They'll have that in libraries so that noise doesn't cover travel and stuff like that, and lots of like little things that just make people's lives potentially more comfortable and things run a little bit easier. The sort of magic system itself I had to almost like let wash over me a bit, because some of it I didn't understand, but I still had a lovely time with it. And then the subject matter itself, as I said, it covers a lot of colonialisation, it covers sort of revolution, women in education itself, and just so much is covered in here. And like I said, the ending had me absolutely bawling. I really love this book, and I'm so pleased I read it and had such a great time with it. I would read it again. Like, I finished it and thought I would read that again from start to finish. I had such a great time with it. I really loved it, and yeah, I can't see it not being one of my favourite books this year. I mean, we'll see if things carry on as they've been going, but yeah, had an amazing time with it. Next up, I listened to the audiobook of, which I have the book here, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. I bought this copy when I went to London last year with Mercedes, and was planning on reading it, but got it in the, I think it was like 2 for 1 in the Audible sale, and I thought I'm gonna read that more there, and I really enjoyed it. You're following Mika Moon, who is a witch, and who has relocated to Norwich in order to look after 3 young witches who can't control their powers. There's a lot of sort of like secrecy around witches, and they never meet in the same place, and they never sort of like gravitate in the same area because of like the energy that could be there and stuff like that. So it's very unusual to have 4 witches in one place at one time, and the majority of the story is about Mika and trying to like get these witches to harness their power, and them trying to live sort of like normal lives. And I really enjoyed the friendship aspect to that, and Mika trying to find her place in the world. One thing I didn't enjoy was that I really feel like the sort of sisterhood and friendship and the witchy stuff was enough without sort of like elbowing in a romance, because Mika ends up getting into a romantic situation with someone who's just there. That's what I sort of felt about it. And I know sometimes these books sell a little bit more, or will be a bit more peppy if they've got a romance in them, but I didn't need that romance. I enjoyed the story more without it, and actually by the end I was a bit like, that's a shame that there's this romance here. So yeah, enjoyed it. Thought it was very cute, very cozy. Yeah, enjoyed. Next up is Weathering by Lucy Wood. This was the book that won the first lines battle, the first lines battle of 2023, and this didn't disappoint. This has actually been languishing on my shelves for such a long time, so I'm so pleased I did the first line battle thing, which is something I've been doing on my channel, where I read the first line out of a few books and battle them against each other, and then the winner will be added to my TBR. So this got added to, so I did that in January, and this got added to my TBR for February. And I think otherwise it probably just would have stayed on my shelves, but I really enjoyed this. This was a sort of like generational tale, mainly set in a house by a river. We start with this Pearl, an older lady, dying in the river, and then her daughter Ada, coming back to the house to get sort of affairs in order, and bringing her daughter Pepper with her. So we're hearing from Pearl, Ada and Pepper, and all of their experiences of this house and the people around it, and it felt very sort of like seasonal and lots of like nature writing in there and stuff, and I had a lovely time with it. So very pleased that it won, because I probably would never have got around to it. So yeah, great. Then I've got Woman Eating, which is a book I got out from the library by Claire Coder. I enjoyed this as well. This was a book about vampires, and we're following Lid's character. It's a lot sort of like, weirdly, there's been a lot, I've read a lot this month, and also had a lot to do with sort of like, we went to the Tate Modern this month, and this book refers to the Tate Modern a lot, so I feel like I've read a lot to do with art and things this month, which has been unusual. Lid is a vampire whose mother, who is also a vampire, has just been put into a home as she's getting old and not sort of remembering things. Now, they've never eaten human blood, they've always relied on pig's blood, from an arrangement they had with a butcher when they were living down in Margate, which is near where I live. And now Lid's mother is in a home, like Lid is struggling to get her hands on any blood, and is having to sort of result in sort of like quite gross, doing quite gross things in order to get the sustenance that she needs. I thought this was like an interesting take on a vampire novel, because ordinarily the vampire stuff that I've been exposed to in the past has been sort of like sexy vampires, loads of energy, zipping around, eating people, like just being amazing. And this wasn't. This was very much like a young woman struggling to find her place in the world, whilst having an interest in art and trying to sort of be accepted by her peers and things like that. I found the whole tone of it quite odd, but Lyd herself was also quite odd, so I can sort of see why that was reflected in there. Yeah, I thought it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. I think I found it sort of like in between good and fine. So yeah, that's how I felt about that one. And then I've got Good Morning, Good Night, which is, I've just filmed a book haul, and I was talking about this because I hauled this in the month and read it. Well, David bought this for me for Valentine's Day. This is Good Morning, Good Night, Little Pep Talks for Me and You by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and illustrated by Lin's mate, Johnny Sun. So I don't know what year it was, but at some point Lin was using his Twitter to start the day with a little poem, and end the day with a little poem, and every poem that he started in the morning would start with good morning, and every poem in the evening would end with good night, and each of them sort of like would relate to one another. And I did not even know this book existed. Let me give you an example of this. So, good morning, breathe deep. That hitch in your breath is a record scratch. That throbbing in your temple is the bass, and you control the volume knob. The scars in your mind and your heart are grooves that run deep. Your music, your heart, your life. You've got the aux chord, bump it. Good night. You got the aux chord, your mind is your own, your heart is your own, you set the playlist, bump it. So each poem was sort of like very similar to the poem that had happened that morning, and like just a lovely collection and very sort of like heartwarming and lovely enjoyable stuff. I really like Lin-Manuel Miranda anyway, and Hamilton and Moana and all of that stuff. So yeah, this was really lovely to sort of like find out that somebody that you already sort of enjoy their works has got a book out you didn't know anything about, and your loved one has bought that for you. So I had a lovely time and I read that instantly. So there we go. Then I read Body Language, which was a collection of essays. Got this for Christmas from Jen. Writers on identity, physicality and making space for ourselves. And this is edited by Nicola Chung and Matt Ortiel. Look at that front cover as well, by the way. All those bright, lovely bodies. And this is a collection of essays about all different types of bodies, including people with disabilities and their life experiences, and like all sorts of life experiences, from birth to death to any sort of diseases or things that might have happened along the way. And a lot of these are written with the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic going on. And I thought they were all amazing. Like, when you read an anthology, you're always a bit like, oh, are all of these going to be bangers? But honestly, they were all bangers. Like, I had such a good time with all of them. Like, to say good time sounds insensitive, because some of them are about really horrific sort of like periods in people's lives, or their lives and the sort of like the things they're having to deal with every day. But yeah, I really thought they were all really well written and really got across so much sort of feeling and explanation about a body that I'm not familiar with because I don't live in that body. So yeah, really highly recommend. I think it was very good indeed. We're almost there, guys. God, I've read so much. Then next up was Love in a Headscarf, Muslim Women Seeks the One by Shalina Zara Mohammed. This is a non-fiction, so I didn't realise it was non-fiction. I thought this was fiction. I picked it up from a local charity shop, and then I started reading it this month because it had the word love in it, and a lot, when I was sorting out my February TBR, I pulled all the books off that had anything sort of to do with love on them because of Valentine's Day. And didn't realise that this was non-fiction books. This is all about Shalina trying to find a husband through assisted marriage, where she was using a matchmaker and her family was very much involved, and trying to find herself, and she's a Muslim woman living in the UK, I should point out. And yeah, I found it really interesting. It's probably the most sort of informative account of this that I've read. I've read sort of essays about assisted marriage and had sort of like chats with people at work about it, but never have I had this sort of much information, and I found it really interesting, and what she was looking for and what men were looking for in a wife, and how they can align or how they don't align. There's a lot in here sort of like reflections on religion. Shalina herself is very religious, and wants to wear a headscarf, but she was really surprised at how many men do not want wives that want to wear headscarves, but still want their wives to be very religious. And it's just so, I really found astonishing, the sort of like how these things don't align, how many things that she wanted seemingly were the things that men wanted, but then when they'd come together they'd be like, oh no, we want you to be really religious, sure, but we don't want you to wear a headscarf, and she wants to wear a headscarf. And like how she was the one who was expected to maybe think about, oh yeah, would I, well, everything about this person's perfect, but he doesn't want me to wear a headscarf, would I think about not wearing a headscarf? And those sort of like quandaries that she's going through. I found it really, really interesting. The bit I could not get over, and this happened like multiple times during the book, was that these sort of like introductory meetings, when she was meeting people through a matchmaker, in the end she goes online and she actually ends up meeting somebody not through a matchmaker, spoiler, but when she's trying to meet people through the matchmaker and the introductory meetings they're set up, they would have a man and his family come to visit their family home, and quite often they would have put on like a bit of a spread. There's a lovely bit about samosas and things like that, and they would ask people to sort of turn up at one time. So often with these people, these whole families, like 6 or 7 people at some points, turn up completely late, literally like 4 hours after they said they were going to arrive, and then just expect to be entertained for like the next 6 hours. Like, even though they might have said, oh, we've got a family wedding to go to tonight, so if you are planning on coming at 2, great, because we've got to leave at 6. And then these people would like arrive at like 5:45 and just expect to be entertained and for everything to flow as it was. There's also a situation where Shalina meets up with a man in central London, and it's just the two of them meeting up in a coffee shop. And I mean, I think maybe because I've just got a real thing about people being late. But yeah, so she's meeting up with this chap in central London, and they'd agreed to meet at 4, and she gets there at 4:10, and he's not there, so she takes a seat, gets a coffee, etc, etc, and it gets to 4:30 and he hasn't arrived, and she thinks, okay, sure, that's fine. Gets to 5 and she thinks, oh God, was he there in those 10 minutes? Because I was 10 minutes late. Like, was he there in those 10 minutes? So she rings him or texts him and says, I'm here, are you still coming? Or something to those effects, like whilst trying to still be the cool girl, because we've all been there. And the guy's like, yeah, I'll be there soon, no worries. So then another sort of like half hour comes and goes. She rings him again after 45 minutes. But at this point, like, it's quarter to 6, because she's been waiting an hour and 45 minutes. And she rings him and he's like, yeah, I'm just, so I think he was coming from like definitely out of London, so maybe like Leeds or somewhere, as far like suitable distance away. And he was like, yeah, sorry, it's just the usual traffic, I'm gonna be like half hour. Anyway, he turns up eventually like another 45 minutes, so at this point he's 2.5 hours late. And when he gets there, he's talking about this cricket match that's been on, and he's been at home watching the cricket and everything. And she says, oh, are you watching the cricket today? And he was like, yeah, I didn't finish till 4:30. So even though he told her he wanted to meet her at 4, and like they'd arranged for that, he knew that this cricket match wasn't going to even end until gone 4. She's just been sat there. So like, those sort of things just happen all the time, and yeah, that really bothered me. So yeah, but I found this very informative and interesting, and like definitely, like I said, like this is the longest amount of information I've had on assisted marriage. Next up was the book that we read for Patreon Book Club. We're discussing this tonight, so I'm filming this on Sunday, we're discussing this tonight. This is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I actually listened to the audiobook of this, and enjoyed feels like such a strange word to use to describe this, because it was so sad. I felt so sad the whole way through this, and sort of so helpless and hopeless. Because what this book is about two wives, our wives under the sea. So it's following Miri and Leah, who are married, and Leah is going to work, do a piece of research work on a submarine, and Miri is staying at home whilst she does that. So you sort of know from the very beginning that Leah has returned, and she's not the same person as when she left. Because this is such a sort of like short thing, and not all that much happens apart from the really hopeless, sad, helpless thing, it's really hard to sort of discuss this book without doing spoilers. So yeah, so she's returned, and she's very different to when she left. And you're hearing Miri and Leah's point of view on what happened whilst Leah was down there, from both Leah and Miri, and then Leah's return. And yeah, like I just said, it's so helpless and hopeless, and sort of like hearing about Miri and Leah's relationship before the incident with the submarine, and hearing about all their sort of like jokes they would have and in jokes and like experience, like little trips they'd been on and like date nights and stuff like that, and then looking at their relationship now, which is just so different to that relationship before she went away. It's a real sort of like reflection on losing someone and being so hopeless and helpless during that time. And it just made me feel so sad, because sure, not everyone is maybe going to go down in a submarine and come back completely different, but there's so many things now that could happen, and like dementia being potentially one that was at the forefront of my mind when I was reading this, that could mean that the person that you fall in love with and spend your life with, you lose them without losing them in the sense of their body. They're still there, but they're different people. They're a different person. And yeah, God, it just really made, like, whenever I read anything that's sort of like about people that are clearly in love, which Miri and Leah clearly were, and they're sort of like, their change in their relationship and the sadness of it all, I just think about me and David and how absolutely horrified I'd be if David went away to work on a submarine and come back completely different. So yeah, I found the whole thing very, very sad, but I've got to say I also found it really, really readable, and and I listened to the audiobook of it, and I get really immersed in it. I was doing a puzzle at the time, or driving home from work, and I'd sort of like lose everything else that was going on and just really deeply listen and really, really really like feel immersed in it. So yeah, it's hard to sort of like give these books a star rating when they've affected you so much and made me feel so sad, because I gave it 3.5 stars, but if truth be told, I haven't really stopped thinking about it since I finished. So yeah, it probably would creep up to a 4, but we'll see. But yeah, looking forward to discussing this at book club tonight. Then I've got Let Me Know When You're Home. And this is a short story collection. Well, it's stories of female friendship, but it's also got sort of like poetry in there, non-fiction sort of essays and short bits of writing about female friendship. And I wanted to read this month because I think you can find so much love in female friendship. And that's why, like I said, this month I was sort of like celebrating books that celebrate love. And all of these celebrate so many different kinds of friendships, and there's like different sections to it. So growing apart and growing up, old friends, fake friends, women supporting women, and like every single piece of work in here, I could identify a female friendship that I have had or having, and that was really, really lovely, or really confronting in the like past friendships, or like friendships where I've thought that this has been an equal friendship, but like in retrospect probably not an equal friendship. And yeah, it just really, really reflected a lot of the friendships that I had. So it felt very sort of for me. It really felt very personal and like it had been written for me. But I really, really loved it. I particularly loved the one where they're talking about social media, and I remember sort of like chatting on, like getting my first mobile phone, like not even social media, just like communication between friends over the years. And I remember like being 13 maybe and getting my, no, I must have been a bit older. No, I was 13 because I was in secondary school, in middle school, getting a mobile and like finding out about text messaging and texting people, and then like MSN Messenger becoming a thing, and then MySpace and all, and like she chronicles all her friendships throughout that, and I really enjoyed that and found that really fun. So yeah, some of these were really fun, and some of these were very sort of confronting of things that have happened to me in the past with friendships. But yeah, I really, really thought this was great. This would be a brilliant present. So many brilliant presents. This would be a brilliant present for someone, for a friend. Very much enjoyed. And then I've got last two, guys, last two. I think this might be the longest wrap up I've done in a long, long time. Still Missing by Beth Gutchen. I've finally read one of my Persephone books. Since I started this channel, Persephone is a publisher that publish sort of forgotten works, mainly by women, but also by men. And then they republish them in these sort of beautiful grey books with lovely end papers that normally have a matching bookmark. This one's a lovely end paper. It's like a knitted photo. This one I bought secondhand, so there was no bookmark in there. But I actually saw this. So like I said, I've got 5, maybe even 6 of these. 5 Persephone books that I have been sort of collecting, either brand new or secondhand, since I started this YouTube channel, and I've not read any of them. So this year I said, look, if I haven't read them by the end of this year, they've got to go. Because they've been here for like almost 9 years, like some of them. So anyway, I've read one, hooray! And this one was on Jen Campbell's best books of last year, so that's how I was like, oh, I will definitely read that. And that's all it takes, just for Jen to tell me to read them, and then I'll read them. Yeah, this was actually a book from 1981, so a lot of these books, a lot of these republished books go back from a long, long time. I mean, at the back of this one, there's a whole list, so some of these go from like 1907, 1938, 1849, but yeah, so for this one to be republished, it was 1981. And actually, there's a film written on this book as well. This film, so this film has been remade into a film. This book has been remade into a film without a trace, which I definitely have heard of before, and Beth Gutchen actually wrote the screenplay for it. But what's it about, Lauren? So it's about a young lad, Alex, who goes missing, and his mum, and the sort of police case around that, and them finding someone that they think has been involved in him going missing, and him being missing for a really long time. The title Still Missing sort of refers to after he'd been missing for like a few months, people started being less bothered about it. So to begin with, there's so much community rallying around, and the police are there every day and all of this stuff, and then they have to go around and they stamp all of the posters, the missing posters, with the word still in red to show that he is still missing. And that was quite a sort of big moment of the book, and I felt really like I thought the link to the title and that was like a real big moment. And yeah, and it sort of like focuses on like police and looking at how they tackle these sort of cases. There's a lot in there as well about homophobia and potentially making someone's profile fit in order to sort of like tie up the ends of a crime and stuff like that. But yeah, I enjoyed this a lot, and yeah, I thought it was really great, and I would like to watch the film of it. So there we go. Then the last book, we're finally there, is a reread as well, so I won't go into too much detail because I think this is like the 4th or 5th reread of this I've done. It's Lovin Color by Bolo Babalola. I read a book by Bolo Babalola last month and really enjoyed it. That was the other Reese Witherspoon's book club book. But this is the first book by Bolo Babalola that I'd read. And I read this a couple of years ago, Lovin Color, which is mythical tales and legends and folklores from all around the world, reimagined, centering love and black women as the focus of these stories. And like I said, I read this book a couple of years ago, but then I bought the audiobook again a few years ago and I've listened to it I don't actually know when it first came out, because then we can work out how many times I've done it. So it came out in 2020. Oh, so not all that often. So 2020, then 2021. So this will be my this will be my 4th reread, yeah, because I read it, then listened to the audiobook twice, and then listened to the audiobook again. And every time I have such a great time with this. There's so much sort of like chemistry and sensuality, and I think all the stories are really great. Like the characters are really well fleshed out for those that are in short stories. And that might have something to do with the fact that they're already sort of like characters that exist. So maybe I've got pre-existing ideas when I'm going into a story about Nefertiti, for example, but some of these I've never even heard of, these stories, but all of the character in these stories, but all of the characters are really, really well pulled together. So yeah, I had another lovely time with this. Every time I listen to it, I'm like, great. In fact, I might even get rid of this copy because I love the audiobook so much. So yeah, there we go. So there we go, 15 books and bloody almost 45 minutes later. I hope you've enjoyed my wrap up of the books that I read in the month of February. Let me know if you read any of these books. Let me know what you read in February. And I'll see you all again soon, tomorrow, in March, for my March TBR.